So the problem is we lost touch with truth. We lost touch with the field of pure consciousness. And it practically is difficult to return to it. Essentially, in principle, it's not. But why is it that in practice, people can spend many years without reaching silence and freedom from an ego structure that suffers and that has judgments and that has behaviors that cause its own suffering, right? Why is that we're stuck in that? So today I want to understand that. Even though it is possible to have instantaneous liberation from the ego, in practice it's rare. So it would be good to understand why. And so I want to try to create a diagram that will show you that. And the idea or the concept that was used to understand this by Sri Ramana, who's one of our patron sages here, is the concept of Chit Jada Granthi, okay? Chit Jada Granthi. It's not a the, but a th as a lighter T. So Chit means intelligence. The real is Sat Chit Ananda. That's one of the definitions of the self in its field nature. Intelligence that is in a state of purity of being. The Sat is the field. And Ananda means it's blissful. It's in an ecstatic state because there are no obstacles. There's no karma. It's eternal, luminous, infinite being. So it's blissful. That's who we are. That's our real nature. But we have forgotten it, and our consciousness has become contracted into the illusion that we're human beings going through space and time in a world full of difficulties and insanity and all kinds of unexpected events that disturb our equanimity. Okay, so the way that this knot was most understood, I think most clearly understood in modern or postmodern Western thought is a concept developed by Jacques Lacan in psychoanalysis that he called the Borromean knot. So I'm going to equate these two. This term means, this is knot, granthi, and the knot is intelligence knotted to the jada. Jada means that which is inert, which is the body, the physical body. When consciousness has completely left it, it's a corpse, it's inert. So the consciousness becomes knotted to it, it gives life to the body, but the consciousness loses its infinite field nature and begins to identify with an excitation in the field. Okay? This is the problem. Now, the way Lacan put it is that there are three circles that are interwoven as a knot, and he called them the real, symbolic, imaginary. For Lacan, the real was defined as trauma. Okay? Now, why is the real trauma? The way I would understand it is this. The real self, which is blissful, finds itself contracting and identifying as a fetal body in the uterus of a mother to be, right? One finds one's consciousness before birth, in the intrauterine period, in a very squashed situation, that if the mother is not in a state of bliss, but in a state of anxiety or in a state of some kind of difficulty, all of her mental agitations are poured into your consciousness, and you can do nothing about it. You're totally helpless, and you're totally stuck in a situation that you cannot get out of except through abortion or miscarriage or some other means that would not be pleasant. And one is in a process in which one has no control. Now, if you had a mother who was blissful and who was not disturbed by any of the situations in her life during her pregnancy, you would not have to have created a Chit Jata Granthi. You could have identified with her infinite consciousness and been born without going through the birth trauma of having to be knotted into a body that was being traumatized. That's very rare these days. How many people had a blissful mother? Not too many hands are going up. Okay. That's the situation in what we call Kali Yuga, not the original state of consciousness. We are in a fallen state, in a world full of stresses and struggles that did not exist even 1,000 years ago. If you think of the idyllic kind of world in a rural situation where there are no internal combustion engines, no cars, airplanes, anything disturbing you, and life is very slow and stately and can be very beautiful. And many people went through lives in which there were no wars or conflicts and not even any decisions to make, because, you know, in the feudal period, everything was decided by your birth order and the family you were in, etc. You didn't have to decide what you were going to do for a living. You didn't have to buy insurance. You know, you didn't have to depend on bureaucracies. There weren't even police on the street. There were no guns. There were, you know, things were in a very nice situation for most people during most periods, even of Kali Yuga history that we know about. And there were many higher civilizations before that that are lost in historical amnesia, but we know about if we want to study them. So our consciousness and our ego structures have morphed through time and have become more and more defensive as a result of more and more collective and individual traumas building up, and more situations of war and conflict and enslavement and oppression, etc., as time goes on, and more sense of trauma that happens the moment the consciousness leaves the field and enters into the bodily identification. So that trauma then, which is accelerated by the way birth happens, which is usually not a natural birth anymore. Most births are C-sections today, and not because of need, of medical need, but just convenience of the doctor's scheduling, etc. And that also produces effects of anger, perhaps, or of resignation, giving up to Big Brother before you even start, because you don't get to be born at the moment you choose under your own willpower going through the birth canal. You're ripped out and you are under the control of the Big Other before you even get to start your life. So this produces a kind of matrix of meaning in which there is already a paranoid oppression that is operating before you even acquire language. And then, of course, there are further traumas that happen around the perinatal period, and most mothers in the West do not breastfeed long enough the child, and the conditions of attention are not there because mother has to work, or there is a very unstable pairing between mother and father, and a lot of struggle, anxiety, insecurity, etc., that get obviously imposed upon the child. Right? So trauma is the state that we are born into these days. And then the ego creates an imaginary reaction to that. And produces fantasies that are subconscious. And conscious narratives about life based on these experiences. And then projects those and generalizes from its original experience of mother, father, siblings, extended family onto other people. And once it generalizes those projections, it begins to have the same kinds of negative experiences that it had with those original others with everyone else that it meets, who become, you know, later editions of the same kind of resistant object, let's say. On the symbolic side, one learns language and learns to reason and to feel remorse. Why remorse? Well, first of all, the child has a lot of needs and has to follow a lot of rules. Okay, so when I put law here, really we mean rules for a child to obey or to rebel against. But one has to deal with that, and one has to deal with the helplessness of the physical body and its need for protection and sustenance from adults. It needs mothering for a long period and then fathering and protection as it learns how to leave its local environment and go to school and other situations that can be even more traumatic, right, with bullying, etc. So law and need are in conflict and produce frustration. And the child always assumes that the unhappiness of its parents were caused by it not being good enough, right? If only I were more beautiful, intelligent, Christ-like, whatever, then my parents would have been happy, but I failed them. The child always takes it on, that they were the cause of the unhappiness in their family. If only I hadn't been born, my mother would have become the ballerina she should have been instead of a mother who had to retire, right? And so all of those kinds of taking on of the other's pain is part of the narcissistic mindset of the child. And then it adds more and more burdens to itself. It becomes a karma collector and creates more and more sense of it's my fault about everything. Or it will go to the opposite and judge others and say, it's your fault, I'm innocent, you're the one causing me problems, and one will become an abuser. But one has to make a choice regarding that, but generally the choice is to take on the suffering and to act it out in one's own life. So once one is in that state, there really isn't a way out of that knot. Okay, so if we stopped with Lacan, we would be relatively hopeless. Because the best you could do is, as he says, traverse the fantasies. You can get away from some of your fantasies by realizing they are that, and shift your symbolic understanding of reality out of a narcissistic, it's my fault or it's the other's fault, either or duality. But nonetheless, you're still stuck with trauma and with need and with insane rules that you have to follow, and a sense of helplessness, and a sense of being trapped in a world you didn't create, right? So, is there a way out of this? Well, we would say that these represent chakra 1, 2, and 3. And what Lacan didn't know about, radical acceptance and love, okay? These three, we call the first three assemblage points. 1.5, we usually call them 2.5, 3.5. But they are different modes of being. We call the first one the clinging point, the second dispossession point, and the third the disillusionment point. So within these three chakras, the final one also comes under some of the influence of chakra 4 and enables one to, let's say, to accept reality and to enter the harness, become a productive citizen, let go as much as possible of childish illusions and fantasies and wishes, and to live, quote unquote, realistically. But with an understanding that there's more to life than just that suffering. There is beauty, there is an aesthetic dimension to life. There's an ethical dimension, and if one lives in accord with the Dharma or with higher rules, one can deal with the lower rules that have illegitimate authority. One can live at a higher plane, and one can enter a religious understanding that there is something more to reality than just what appears in the phenomenal plane. So chakra 4 is like the linchpin. By accepting it and not resisting it, fighting it, or identifying with it, one is able to transcend it, okay? And you first transcend it by accepting the terms of engagement, but that's not the end, that's the beginning.